Greetings, Earthlings. I'm for the planet Zorton, and you are listening to The Mind of DCS on the Soup Media Network.
I'm Dr. Claude Windenberger. I'm the inventor.
What's good, everybody? Namaste. Welcome to In the Mind of DCS. If you were hearing some weird things, like it was my intro, and then some guy started talking, pay no attention. I've got something set in Sam's, and I have no idea what it is, and I'll figure out how to turn it off later. But anyway, you are In the Mind of DCS. I am your host, DCS, and I am joined by the one, the only Melchizedek. How are you this evening, my friend?
I am doing wonderful. How about yourself, beautiful? Are you doing all right?
I am doing excellent. I've had a really busy week, so I've had a really lazy day today. Like, I got up and I did like a little bit of work, and then I just took like a 3-hour nap, and it was awesome.
Oh, naps are always awesome.
Naps, in fact, are always awesome. I highly recommend naps if you have not had them recently. Definitely get that into your schedule. I was multitasking for a second. I'm back now. All right, so tonight on In the Mind of DCS, I am very, very excited to have an awesome guest joining us. He gave me a really phenomenal astrology reading, and he's not just an astrologer. He is also the creator of Nightlight Astrology. He's the director of a donation-based astrology school in Manhattan, and he has a private donation astrology-based counseling practice in the city as well. The vision of Nightlight is to provide practitioner training and counseling service as well as public astrological education, and that's all by donation. It's really quite amazing. Not only that, he is doubly awesome because he has also written a book called Fishers of Men, and it was published by the Penguin Group this past summer. It was named one of Publishers Weekly Top 100 Books of 2010, one of 10 selected from the religion genre. I am so excited to be talking with him about his book and about astrology tonight. His name is Adam Elenbass. Adam, welcome to In the Mind of DCS.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be hanging out with you guys.
Absolutely. We are very excited to have you. Before I jump into the good news like I normally do, did I give you a suitable opening? Does that pretty much summarize what you've got going on?
Oh, yeah, totally. That is great. It's more succinct than it works in my head, so that's good.
Yeah. I understand. For those of you listening to In the Mind of DCS for the first time, shame on you, but that's okay. We love you anyway. At the beginning of each show, what I do is I go through some good news articles, and that is to share the good news in the world because there's a lot of bad news, and I say, screw the bad news, let's talk about the good news. So, the first good news article is not really an article, it's really just something that I found out that I wanted to share because I think it's good news, and that is the fact that as of right now, recently, numerous polls show that 63% of Americans, that's 196 million Americans approximately, support bringing our troops home and ending the war. And I think that is awesomely good news, so I just wanted to share that statistic with everybody. I think that's pretty cool. So
yeah, that's a good statistic.
I thought that was a good statistic. And I especially like that he translated it into an actual number. So like 196 million people are like, enough is enough, let's have a little peace. And I think that's quite awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, the second article that I want to share with you tonight, it actually is an article, and it's an article from Yes Magazine. If you are not reading Yes Magazine, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you people? It's awesome. So definitely read it. The article was really interesting because it is titled, Rocky Times Ahead, Are You Ready? This isn't a future that you can or should face alone, and how to make sure that you don't have to. This is by Sarah Brines and Chuck Collins. I don't believe the economy is getting any better, said Billy R., a member of a mutual aid group in Oregon that he jokingly calls my reality support group. All around me, I'm surrounded by media and advertising urging me to keep borrowing, buying, and sleepwalking. I love meeting with others who are staring down the potential risks and challenges of the future. Maybe more of us could use a reality support group. Even with the announcement the official unemployment rate fell to 9.4%, millions of people remain in dismal economic straits. The pace of home foreclosures has barely slowed, and millions remain out of work. Even upbeat scenarios will assume protracted unemployment and economic stagnation for much of the decade ahead. The unspoken scenario is that things could get worse. Can forming a small group like this one really make a difference when the problems we face seem so overwhelming? History tells us that they can. So here's the point. You must not face the future alone. Find your own reality support group. We'll tell you how. This year, make a resolution to deepen your relationships with people around you with whom you can face what's coming down the pike. Sometime during the next couple of years, there will likely be a fundamental shift. It might be another economic meltdown or a shock to the economy. It could be an extreme weather events. These changes could lead to food and water shortages. They could test our personal and community preparedness in ways that we have not experienced in our lifetimes. You should know that we, the authors of this piece, are not preaching Armageddon, bunker building, pessimistic people. They are parents, gardeners, and actors of our neighborhoods. They're like a good football party, even though they root for different teams. They believe our society has almost everything we need to build stronger communities, reduce inequality, live in harmony with the earth, and make a grateful transition to a new sustainable economy. But we won't get there ignoring the data, and we won't get there disconnected from one another. We're not talking about yet another issue campaign. We certainly need to remain engaged in the good fights around economic justice, peace, democracy, the environment. But there is something huge missing right now in our approach to social change. Our social movements are weak, and with some expiring exceptions, they're not changing the political dynamics. The netroots online organizing and social media are creating ways to get money and power in specific situations, but online activism is not a substitute for a movement based on durable and trusting face-to-face relationships. In some religious and labor traditions, this is called solidarity. Presently in the United States, we are witnessing the emergence of politics based on fear and the erosion of status. Millions of people saw their livelihoods and dreams collapse in the aftermath of the economic meltdown. Some people respond to these circumstances by blaming themselves and feeling ashamed about their difficulties. Many are hunkering down, feeling depressed and withdrawn. In the U.S., we tend to think everything is about the individual, even blaming ourselves for things that are largely beyond our control. But all over the planet, people are defying the stereotypes of the self-centered economic man and instead caring for one another, building alternative economies, and deepening that bond we have with each other. There's a good reason to be angry and to focus on people financially and politically responsible. But as in the grieving process, we must move anger to a place where we can boldly face today's difficult realities and also initiate proactive responses. We can start by learning to accept and live within the new limits set by the economic and ecological reality. Rebecca Schnolnett, in her remarkable book, A Paradise Built in Hell, reminds us to look for the shadow governments of kindness, the deep reservoirs of resilience and compassion that emerge during disasters and troubled times. Now, a movement to build economic security. The good news is that people are already coming together in small groups to form and strengthen relationships. Some are called common security clubs. Others go by names like mutual aid groups and unemployment support groups. Call it whatever you want. The purpose is the same. Getting together regularly, 8 to 15 adults, to face the challenges and the changes. Small groups organizing is part of the missing architecture in our social movements, and that may be why it's catching on so quickly. We need to start learning together, developing mutual aid for each other, really enhancing social action. And the article goes on to state that a group of unemployed workers in Maine created a resource sharing exchange. They met regularly at the library and laughed so much the librarian didn't believe that they were economically struggling. A group in Greenfield, Massachusetts calls themselves the Neighbors and meets monthly to check in, sing together, and practice mutual aid. On another night, they might meet for a monthly game night, what one member called fun and affordable entertainment. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, a network of unemployed and anxiously employed workers meets weekly and has formed committees to help educate one another about computer use, unemployment insurance, stress management in tough times, and green job opportunities. Part of our work is to help face the unemployment bureaucracy benefits, said one of the founders. They invite people lead employment offices to join the group. Workers can volunteer at libraries on Sundays afternoon, and then they can help unemployed workers file claims. So can forming a small group like this make a difference when the problems we face seem so overwhelming? Yes, they can. At many crucial moments in our past, small groups have been the one that played an essential role in incubating the seeds of great change. During the Great of the 1930s, more than 27,000 shared our wealth to discuss the causes of the Depression and advocate for radical programs of wealth redistribution. In the 1930s, seniors organized township clubs to advocate old age pensions, a formidable social movement that added to the pressure to establish Social Security. By 1936, more than 8,000 clubs have been formed with over 2 million members. In the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, people formed nonviolent direction action groups to engage in sit-ins and keep up morale. Activists rooted in faith-based congregations and tight-knit communities were able to take greater risks knowing that if they should be jailed or worse, there were others to care for their children and their elders. So, bottom line, judging the stories about groups getting there and environment change. And she said too about, I mean, I think that all these online moves that we've got are phenomenal and they are absolutely a starting point. But she's kind of got a point when she says nothing beats face-to-face interaction. You know, I
Well, absolutely.
Jump in, guys. Go ahead.
I was just saying, absolutely. There's nothing like face-to-face interaction. You know, a computer is an interface. You can be face-to-face with somebody through a computer, but it's the same as being in the presence of another entity. You don't get the same vibes. You don't get a lot of the same things as you would. And, well, I guess I could say some people don't, because a vibration is something that can actually go beyond time and space, I'm assuming, and some people probably are more in tune with the vibrations than others, and a mechanical or cyber interface might not interfere as much, but to me, physical interaction is a lot more potent than something online.
I agree. I would agree with that. I think too, like, even as a writer, there's that quip I've heard before about, you know, if you're writing on a computer and you're trying to put the light and the heart and the love into the words and onto the page, but you're looking at a screen that is omitting light at you, it's hard to push against the light literally being omitted from a screen and onto the page. There's a bit of an interference energetically, and then as opposed to writing on paper where your physiology can go into the pen, and your hand can be used in coordination with your mind and your physiology, and then on the paper it reflects light. It doesn't omit it. And I think it's I've always kind of like balked at, like, oh yeah, but I love to write on my computer. Just recently I started writing with my hand, and I'm finding that now going back to the computer, the technology is like, it's like enhanced. Like I can write better on a Word document because I'm taking a little time to go old school to pen and paper. Maybe it's a similar metaphor for meeting in person.
Well, yes. Well, and also too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say I feel the same way when writing too. I like a little bit of both. You know, pen and paper, they help in a lot of ways, and then the computer helps in a lot of ways. And if you get, me and the sister DCS had a conversation one time, and she brought this up that if you get blocked in one of those avenues, you can use the other avenue sometimes, and it unblocks the creative block anyway, or the writer's block. And also, writing is a form of divination, whether people realize it or not. You are literally putting characters onto a piece of paper, and there are lots of the holy texts that go into, putting your visions down on the tablet, as it says in the Old Testament in Habakkuk, and putting your vision down on the tablets and inscribing them, and then putting them out there to become what is reality. But it's said in more or less those terms right there. But there are other holy books that put it in different ways. And I say holy books, but these texts that a lot of people refer to about these subjects.
Absolutely. You're like all up in my head here, Melchizedek. That's exactly what I was going to say. That when I'm blocked on the computer, nothing beats like I will just go and I will take a pen to a piece of paper and I'll just spit it out like that. And it's it's difficult because then you got to transfer it back to the computer, and I can't always read my handwriting. But at the same time, there really is something about every now and then just going old school. So yeah, Yeah. You know what? I don't think that the social movements online are not as powerful as she makes, as the authors make them out to be. I think they are. But again, nothing just beats, knowing your neighbor, and actually we definitely have to bring it from, this virtual place, which is awesome, especially for getting, multiple communities and all these different places together into kind of just one big forum. But I mean, nothing beats being able to know the guy around the block.
Yes.
Right. We can talk about this a little later too, but I think, since like about 97, we've been dealing astrologically, we've been dealing with a transit of Pluto through Aquarius, which has really been the big boom of the internet being the social meme. And I think that as we're about to, in the next couple of months here, Neptune's about to approach, going through Pisces, which will, be a whole different kind of, energy that we'll be dealing with. But during that exchange, I feel like one of the reasons that we developed this whole internet thing is it's almost like a social interface that is a yang to a yin or a yin to a yang. So I really resonate with what Melchizedek was just saying about how, writing by hand can unblock writing on the computer. Writing on the computer can unblock writing on the hand. I think social movements and the use of the internet in general, a very Neptune in Pisces, Neptune in Aquarius-like thing that just happened over the past 13 or 14 years, and because of it, we have this social interface that can work wonders. I mean, just this week, my company was able to fundraise, about $6,000 all through online efforts. That's remarkable, and it would have taken so much concentrated work and a carbon footprint, I think, 13 years ago. So it's like a tool, but I think we have to learn how to not be so dependent on it and use it's like one tool in the belt. We got to know sort of like when it's time to pull that tool out.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I agree.
I think it's just a matter of us, we've got all these new technologies and these new things we can do. We just have to learn how to balance them all. That's kind of, it's almost like a society, we always move from one extreme to the next, and we kind of miss just landing in the middle. So I think that's just something for us to just be working on. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I definitely want to get into the astrology, but we're going to save that for the second part of our conversation, because I really want to talk, Adam, kind of about your history and this phenomenal book that you wrote called Fishers of Men. I'm reading the synopsis about the book on your website, and that's absolutely fascinating. That is, wow. Like you had no idea that your astrologer was deep like this. So, why don't you, let's just start from the top here. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background and what promoted you to write this book?
Before you start, I just have to say that I really, really enjoy the title of the book and how deep that actually goes. If someone was to actually think about those few words and what they actually mean and what one can get from those words, I really appreciate that title. I just wanted to throw that in there before you got started.
Oh, thanks, man. It was one of those things where at first my agent thought, no, this title is too trite or cliched, and then I showed it to the editor at Penguin, and he said, no, I think there's something a little deeper about this, that it's, once you sit with it, it resonates in a strange way. And I was like, well, that's exactly what it did for me, and it came through one of the experiences that I described in the book, actually, too. So, yeah, I appreciate that. The full title, I should mention the subtitle of the book, because I'm sure that's probably what Melchizedek is referring to. It's Fishers of Men, and the subtitle is The Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest.
That right there, yes. Well, the whole title is what caught my attention, and when you have the word gospel in Fishers of Men, a Christian thinking mind would automatically go to the New Testament, and where Jesus or Yeshua referred to them and said, instead of being fishers of fish, come with me and become fishers of men. And a gospel began from that. So there's a lot of an audience that would feel a resonation just with that one line right there.
Yeah, and then you throw in the word ayahuasca, and it gets real interesting.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Well, wait, what does that mean?" And everybody's flipping through their notes, trying to find this word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Adam, how did we get here?
Sure. Well, I'll tell this. It's a little bit of a story, but worth telling to get to a full description of the book. So I mean, I grew up in the in the Midwest as the son of a sort of evangelical Methodist preacher, and the funny thing about growing up in the evangelical church is a lot of people don't know that it's sort of like politics. There's a wide range of liberal and conservative doctrine and theology that goes and floats in and out of these congregations and church experiences. So I grew up in a fairly liberal congregation, although the older the demographic of the congregation, the more conservative. So you grow up in a church that's liberal, you can say that, but then half of the congregation, if they're over 60, are incredibly conservative. So I grew up with a strange mix of like conservative, liberal, Christian, evangelical. And then there was my father, who had really been inspired to go into the ministry through LSD experiences in the early 70s. And so he was one of, I think, a batch of people who went into spiritual work, having been raised Christian in the sort of, right, white, male, patriarchal, all of that stuff, and at least in the Midwest. And his spiritual calling was about the only thing I think he knew. He knew what to do with these incredibly mind-expanding experiences he had had with psychedelics coming out of the 60s and early 70s. So my dad was what I would call a sort of closet evangelical shaman or something. I mean, he was like it's funny to describe him that way, but he like hid his Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung books under the bed so that the conservative parishioners wouldn't know that he was reading like the Masks of God, and
yeah.
And so he and we had he grew up with Native American friends in northern Michigan, his boyhood friends, and he had a deep love for Native American shamanism, Native American mythology, and I grew up on all of that stuff and the natural world. My dad had worked for the Department of Natural Resources in Michigan, so I grew up learning how to fish and, going canoeing and backpacking and spending a lot of time outside. And my dad built teepees and was the local, like, Native American educator for the school system. And so, I mean, like, I had this very esoteric side, growing up, even though I was also steeped in, Jesus is the only way. And so it was that is a large part of what I explore in the book is, what it's like to grow up in middle America church where, the popular conception is that these places are just fundamentalist or, incredibly conservative, when in fact there are ministers and there are people in these congregations that are Christian. Primarily, they're esoteric, liberal, universalist, all these things, because there's no other place for them to go, or they didn't know what else to make of a lot of these mind-expanding experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I grew up, it's a funny thing, because I think that's one of the things that we, in my book I try to explore, is that my generation, those of us who are in our late 20s, early 30s, and maybe a little even older, that we really are the children of the generation of people who went through that mind expansion of the 60s. And what you really find is not like, it's like a mixed bag of lots of different beliefs and ideologies, and the religious confusion that our parents had wasn't like finally sorted out after one acid trip, so
yeah.
Not at all.
So
I really resonate that, because my mother is she's such a kind of liberal, out there, she's a trip. My mom's an absolute trip, somebody that I would still take to parties with me to this day. But at the same time, she's got that, she's a vice president in corporate America, so there's that side of it, and then my stepfather is like this slightly liberal, yet slightly conservative, and yet I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who's a complete Catholic. But she's a liberal Catholic, but she's a complete Catholic. So, I wrote a book, and I would never let her read it, because of the stuff in there would just, like, make her poor little Catholic head explode. So I completely understand. You grow up in like this pot of stew, and it's just like there's all kinds of stuff in it. It's just
Yeah, it's true, and I guess it got more complicated as I grew older because my dad was becoming very popular. I think he was becoming popular because he was more and more, he was speaking out from the pulpit and trying to present what I have come to understand as the archetypes of the Christian gospel or the mythology. Now, that doesn't mean it's not true. It's just the deep symbolism that can be transferred throughout other cultures and other stories and myths and legends. And he drew a lot of people to the church who otherwise, I think, would have been feeling like they did not belong to the church because it was too strict. He had an interesting way of being evangelical while still remaining very universalist. Well, as his career grew and he was appointed to bigger and bigger churches, you kind of become like a military brat, moving around a lot when you're a preacher's kid, and we did that. And as my dad's career grew, he fell victim to some of the ego traps, the midlife crisis, the too much money, the sexual affair outside of the marriage, and it was right around the time where Bill Clinton was kind of falling apart too. And I remember having this moment. I was in high school, I was about to graduate, and I remember thinking, this whole liberal thing is nothing more than, it's all just turning into credit cards and mortgages and suburbs and greed. And I remember thinking, I know this is crazy, I remember thinking, screw it. If there's many women and there's many faces of God, then it's all just one big excuse to pick and choose what you want. And so my big rebellion was to leave my dad's church and go join the evangelical, Pentecostal, ultra-fundamentalist Baptist church. So like not the typical rebellion, I guess, because it was really a kind of like a religious feud of a rebellion.
That has
but I mean,
family discussions.
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, my dad was pissed. Oh my God. So, well, so as this kind of went on, and I literally, my family was moving again to another place, and they were leaving, my home state of Minnesota, and I decided to stay in Minnesota and go to college at this ultra conservative, very wealthy private Baptist school, and I went to this school and tried to fit in, and of course, it all started falling apart, for me, because my roots really were although my father's, had his moral failures, the roots of where my family came from really had some beautiful universal truth to it, and abandoning that for me wouldn't be possible. There was too much love in it. So I started to fall apart in drug addiction, tons of promiscuous sex, and just spiraling into a more traditional sort of nervous, addictive breakdown. At which point, the drugs up into this point in the story that I had ever used were, party drugs, and very addictive drugs, cocaine, uppers, downers, alcohol, cigarettes, just the typical, and then the sex, and this is all very ego-based and all ways of avoiding what I felt inside, which was confusion and pain. And by accident one night, I happened to be offered some of these some mushrooms, and I just thought, well, it's probably like pot, I'm just going to get a little high or whatever, and it'll be great fun, and that's that. Not
quite the same.
Famous last word. So, yeah, I mean, very soon into the experience, I had locked myself into my bedroom, completely terrified, and it was, and then I was like, all these things. I was looking at my music collection, being like, oh my God, I hate my dad, or and I was like looking at my toiletries and being like, why am I so insecure about my manhood, and like, it's just like this total sort of psychotherapeutic meltdown. But as it went on, it got more and more joyful because the immense level of truth was undeniably beautiful. Like, holy cow, this is like someone just turned the light on in my head. And I didn't know how dark it was in here. And I started going through the closet and trying on all sorts of different pieces of clothes that I had kind of, never worn because I didn't think I looked good in them. I don't have enough muscles to wear that shirt, so I'm not gonna, and I was putting them all on and being like, no, Adam, you're beautiful, and I was like, tons of clothes. I had like layers and layers of clothing on. My friends found me and thought I had completely lost it, and I'm sitting there trying to explain to them, no, I've become totally enlightened. So
it's almost like a sense of you finding your true self, by accident almost. Your true self trips you when you're walking down the hallway, like, hey, where the fuck are you going?
Exactly.
I've got this fantastic image in my head of like Adam just sitting in his dorm room going, "Oh my God, I suck and it's awesome."
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was like instead of it was like a breakdown and in a cosmic sort of giggly way. It was crazy. And I just remember toward the end of the evening, as I was doing this, I was exploring. At the time I was in. My parents had this little cottage that they had built for retirement on some land in Michigan, and I was in this cottage, and I was looking at the bookshelf after this. The party had kind of died down, and people were. I was kind of back into my body and everything, and I was looking at this bookshelf that was my father's, and I had all these books. And I happened to figure out that my dad had tons of books on his shelf that were all about psychedelics, like The Doors of Perception and Carlos Castaneda and all this stuff. And I just thought, this is what got my dad to be a preacher? No, that's incredible. You know what I mean? I get it. I totally get it. And I just felt this deep sense of I love my family, I love my roots, and just such a healing thing. And of course my father was patching up the marriage, and I was still pretty bitter. But it was right around this point that at any rate I started to get clean. I kind of turned my life around, and along that path I became very fascinated with the traditional use of entheogens or plant-based healing medicines, primarily the visionary ones, the ones like mushrooms that cause a sort of altered state of consciousness, but that had been used by shamans for, many hundreds, if not thousands of years to either initiate people into adulthood or heal some sort of psychological or psychic trouble And it led me, synchronicity by synchronicity, sort of led me all the way down to the Amazon, where for the next 4 or 5 years I started to work with an incredibly powerful healing tradition that utilizes a plant tea that's made in the jungle called Ayahuasca, which is similar to the Navajo's use of peyote or the mushrooms, and an incredibly powerful visionary plant, and also a purgative. And I started doing deep healing work that would, and I'm still, of course, very invested in this work today. And my book is all about how these healing journeys in the Amazon, these sort of vision quest ceremonies, interacted with, my background, my father, the Christianity, the religion. And I was having visions of all sorts of things. And so the book really traces the memoir story, which is funny and middle American Christian and interesting. And then there's this whole other piece about these ceremonies in the jungle and how the visions and healing experiences were sort of dialoguing with the memoir parts of the story.
Wow.
Nice.
That's really quite awesome how we go from this awesome experience that you had in your dorm room one night to working down in the Amazon with this tradition. That's how long did you spend down there? I mean, it's definitely a great movie.
Yeah, I mean, I went back. I mean, I'm still doing the work today, so I still do these ceremonies. I've done somewhere around 90 of them now. But I've over the course of the 5 years that the book covers, I did about 50 ceremonies and went to South America 5 times for a period of a couple of weeks each time to work in a sort of regiment of these ceremonies with a number of different shamans. The book primarily examines my relationship with the first shaman I worked with, but just like preachers, shamans aren't perfect people, and so there's a whole dynamic in the book where I explore relationship of the seeking gringo to the Amazonian shaman as well.
No, that's amazing. Tell me a little bit more about these ceremonies. I guess we like to do like a 101 here. So for people who have no idea what we might be talking about, what are we talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a good. I mean, we have the overview of the book and the story now. So we'll talk more about the ayahuasca experience. It's ayahuasca is made from a leaf and a vine of the jungle that are harvested by curanderos and these healers and ayahuasqueros, which are shamans that work specifically with ayahuasca medicine. It's a tea, like I said. It's made from this leaf and vine. It's cooked over a fire with water for most of, about half a day, maybe about 5 or 6 hours. It's continually boiled down until it gets into this pretty thick, kind of sludgy, really earthy, bitter, kind of foul-tasting tea. The shaman will pour this tea at evening after the sun sets and it's kind of dark out in the jungle, and will pour this tea for everyone, and including themselves. Shamans are, of course, under the influence of the ayahuasca medicine throughout the entire ceremony, and the shaman will then prescribe doses, and then after that, sort of magical, they really are magical too, songs that are taught to the shamans in alternate, I can't even believe I'm saying this, they're taught to, it's just such a bizarre thing to say, but they're taught to the shamans in sort of alternate dimensions. I mean, and literally, like, they'll sing a song, for example, of the blue river or the pink river dolphin, and literally a very aquatic realm of visionary activity will open up, all surrounded by, pink river dolphins and symbols, and mythological symbols that are all having to do perhaps with like your emotional life with the water or something like that. So the shaman will sing these songs throughout the night, and they shake a rattle that's called a shakapa, and this is all happening in a ceremonial space, sometimes called a mesa, and the flow of visionary force, which means the way that the visions manifest in your mind and in your body. This is a mind-body experience, and as those visions are occurring, they will take you psychologically into what I can only describe it in sort of Western terms, I think, for the audience, but it's like your shadow side. Mm. So very specifically. Yeah. So I look at Carl Jung. His description of the shadow is pretty accurate, and these songs are designed really to sort of take you into what do you fear? Where is your ego? How well do you take care of your body? What are your relationships like? Are they filled with love? Are they filled with bitterness? Are you a jealous person? Whatever it is, it doesn't matter if it's not, if it's not coming from a place of acceptance, love, gratitude, and centeredness in the heart. The medicine experience both in vision and in body will take you into a deep visionary understanding of both what the problem is that you're dealing with, what the behavioral complex is, and then simultaneously it'll show you where it came from. If you picked it up from a predator or being molested, or if it was something that you carried with you perhaps from a different lifetime, or if it's just something that's a part of who you are because of the culture you grew up in. And then what it does is the shaman will get a kind of read on, okay, now I've got the group into a space where they're starting to explore the shadow. And at that point, the shaman will start to call in medicinal spirits like anacondas, jaguars, all sorts of crazy, Narnia-like creatures. And these creatures will sort of come in and, or sometimes they appear this way, sometimes in other ways, but they'll come in and they will help assist in what the shamans will call the cleaning, which is now it's time to release these energies. It's time to purge them. So the jungle, oftentimes they call the experience of drinking ayahuasca la purga, which just means, the purge. And you will vomit, scream, defecate, shake, thrash, cry, laugh so hard until you vomit again. And these experiences are literally like releasing a typhoon worth of baggage. And, some people say 5 or 6 years sometimes worth of good psychotherapy in about 5 or 6 hours. So
it's almost like, is it almost like the purification process? Like they talk about in the ancient texts where before you go into the temple, you got to purify your body so that you're of a pure state. So is it similar to that, but instead of going into like a physical temple, you're actually going into your temple, your body, and purifying yourself for that so that you can meet like your universal self, your true self?
Yes, you couldn't have described it any better. That's I think an absolutely perfect description of what it is that you're doing. It like my first truly experiential appreciation of Jesus, I think, really came from that experience. Now, I think it can be gained through a lot of different ways, but the whole idea of being transfigured or being crucified, and I don't mean, crucified in a sort of, oh, poor Jesus, he was persecuted, but literally in the the release of attachments to this world and dark stuff that we carry around with us, the death process of letting go of that, and that's why we scream and shake. And I just had such a deep appreciation for all of the avatars and just like, there are points in the ayahuasca ceremony where I remember being on my knees and literally screaming, God help me. And it was the first time ever that I had requested help from God, from a place that made me understand why people ever fell on their knees and asked God for help in the first place, very, very deep. Yeah, and I think a lot of people have it, I was young, I was early 20s, so what did I know at the time? But I remember just thinking, this is where religion comes from. It comes from the times in life where we're being broken down and having to go through a symbolic death and rebirthing experience. That's really at the core of the ayahuasca ceremonies.
Well, speaking about stuff like this and making that connection between the symbolism of faiths and shamans and these processes or these purifications, have you heard the Siberian shamans a long time ago? And this is where the ornaments on the Christmas tree comes from. Used to hang the mushrooms, which had red bulbs and white flakes on them, on the tree to dry out, so that they could experience these experiences, and they would hang them on evergreen trees, since that was a tree that lived all year long, basically. Have you heard that before?
Yeah, I've heard that story before, and as a matter of fact, I think it's a really, there's a fascinating book by Terence McKenna called "The Food of the Gods," and
I have it 5 feet from me, sitting on my bookshelf.
Yeah, man, that book is so fantastic, and I think at some point, let's just say, for example, a long time ago, this is kind of his thesis, that we were group-think type of people, like we were tribal sort of, ant colony, like group mind people, or Edenic, where we were more in a collective consciousness state. Then what would be a good, candidate in the diet or the dietary choice of a human being that could catalyze, self-consciousness or a higher degree of self-consciousness? And one of the great arguments McKenna made in his career as a thinker was to suggest that perhaps it was psychoactive substances like the Siberian mushroom or the soma or ayahuasca or whatever that could say, because what do psychedelics do? They really show you whatever's being repressed. So if you're really cocksure, then what's repressed is your fear, and if you're really a groupthink person thousands of years ago, what's being repressed is your autonomy or your individuality. So his theory was that the development of individualism could have come through the ingestion of psychedelic plants in the human diet. And all the symbolism we have about the transformation from a more Eden-like state to a state of more dissociation or separateness, it all involves the eating of some kind of forbidden fruit, you know? So it's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, there's another book called The Green Gold, Marijuana and the Tree of Life, and it's written, I can't remember the name, it's over on the shelf too. And in some of the chapters, they actually describe that as the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. So, in other words, instead of being the forbidden fruit, it would be the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil that they partook of in order, that basically caused the original sin, instead of an apple as portrayed in most of the paintings or whatever.
Oh, yeah, I tend to agree that these substances have played an important role in the evolution of consciousness.
Yes.
I'm sitting here taking it all in because it's an absolutely fascinating topic for me. I love hearing these stories. As someone who has not yet participated in such a thing, I definitely like to at some point. So this is just like
a little late to the party, huh?
I am a little late to the party, but that's okay. That's because I've got this. That's because I've got this fear in my mind that like Freddy Krueger's gonna appear in front of me. I'm gonna have a conversation with him or something. That's just my overactive imagination.
Well, you're a science fiction fan, I know, because you're a science fiction writer and everything. and so yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to to put you down into the ranks of fans. So, but the classic example.
Go right ahead.
I think the classic example from science fiction that I know of that I think George Lucas was, I'm sure, had some, and he was a student of Joseph Campbell, so we know he certainly probably had some mind-expanding experiences. So he, the part where Yoda in Empire Strikes Back says to Luke, "You've got to go into the cave of your own darkness."
Mm-hmm.
And then Skywalker goes into the cave and he says, "Don't bring your weapons, and Luke says, "No way, I'm bringing my weapons with me." And then he gets into the cave and he faces Darth Vader and he, of course, gets into a fight with him because he's got his weapons. He chops his head off and the mask comes off and there's his own face. And it's like that is the archetype of going into the vision quest, that's it.
It's like slaying the material ego, your true self, slaying the material ego, or the material ego, like you were saying, you scream and vomit and sometimes defecate. Perhaps that's the ego's way, almost like an exorcism of not wanting to leave the body, the material, or not wanting to be restrained just to the material essence, and your true self kicking it to the curb, saying, "Oh, you had your time. Now it's time to walk this path or to be shown this, so that can become."
Right.
Yes, exactly. And the one thing that I would kind of add to it is that one of the experiences of my book, too, was recognizing that the great thing about Yoda was that he was very peaceful, and he was not very he was not he was not macho about how he. Yeah, I wish I could do a good Yoda impression.
Yeah.
That would be.
Why don't I have a Yoda wave now? Because this would be the perfect time to play one. Like Yoda and Darth Vader are like my two favorite things in Star Wars. And it's such opposite ends of the thing, but I just do. I have an affinity for Yoda and Darth Vader. I love them both.
Well, Yoda was like such a peaceful shamanic initiator for Luke. Like, he was so kind and gentle and yet firm. And the thing about all this is, it's great that I'm talking, about slaughtering your ego in the cave of darkness and screaming and kicking and thrashing, but really the whole point is that if you don't bring your it doesn't sound like the most peaceful, universal, loving thing to do to yourself, right? But I think that the point is that the only reason that the experience becomes like that, because at 80 or 90 of ceremonies in now, I'm capable of sitting through an entire ceremony without leaving my buns, just breathing and breathing and holding my peace within myself, and that's the discipline. And you find out that the only reason you're kicking and thrashing is because you've been carrying weapons around with you. And so the training process itself is very gentle and healing, It's just that some of the things we bring with us are difficult to let go of. My first 25 ceremonies or so were brutal, but after that it got a lot easier. And so I want to make that distinction for listeners thinking like, this is about light and love and you got to like thrash and scream and like, that sounds terrible. Why would you do that?
Right. And, I love the kind of the literal expression of it, because I read a lot of stuff, I read a lot of spiritual stuff, and they always talk about this transformation that you take, this energetic detox, the purification process, however it is described. But you're talking about, literally, going through a ceremony and releasing that sort of thing, and that's really, 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 really fascinating to me. And it's not so much that it's this horrible thing. It's just that people have to look at it as, you've had X number of years of just like really bad habits that are doing things to your body, and they are affecting your interactions. And so you're talking about a ceremony that kind of just releases all of that in like one shot. So, I mean, might not be the most pleasant thing to start out with, but as Adam said, eventually it will get better.
Yeah, but at the birth of something beautiful, there has to be labor pains.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like birth,
exactly.
You watch a mother in birth, and you're like, oh my God, why would you ever do that? And then a mother will get through and tell you she'd do it like 1,000,000 times. So, and that's pretty amazing.
Well, and we like, I think when we go through experiences like this too, there are ways of cleaning yourself, I think, that are just as efficient and are not as traumatic. But that's in the Amazon, why they call it medicine. Sometimes you're sick and you need medicine, as opposed to, other holistic health modalities. The medicine might be, more and more it's called a lifestyle change. And so I got a lot of homework from the medicine too. It says, do you like the way you feel after you just released all of that? And heck yeah, I do. What do I do to keep this around? How do I make sure I don't fall into the same traps? And that's where the really practical side of the medicine comes in, because it's not just let's purge you of your demons. It's also let's teach you what a lifestyle of peace and harmonious living is between your mind, your body, or your lower self, your higher self, or whatever. And those things were like, dude, you haven't drank like a healthy amount of water day to day for years. What are you doing? So water, so hydrate. You don't go to bed and get up with a natural rhythm, like with the sun, something that's immensely helpful. For example, you need to stretch out more, you need to actually move your body around, because energy gets stuck when you don't move your body around. So exercise or stretching, or, you need to eat more greens. Green is the color of all that grows and thrives from the solar energy. So take more of that into your body, and so will you. Just like really, really simple advice that if people incorporated, day in, day out as a new patterned way of living, they would release the same energies that they do in 5 or 6 hours worth of drinking ayahuasca. But regardless, if you did drink ayahuasca and got rid of it all, you'd have to maintain a new kind of lifestyle to make it last. And the plant spirits and visions are very clear about those pieces of homework as well. In fact, if you go back to an ayahuasca ceremony and haven't done your homework or have fallen into old patterns, it's like many indigenous people call the ayahuasca spirit grandmother, because when you go back, if you have not done your homework, you fall into old habits, she might get out the ruler a little bit.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, you in trouble.
Yeah, it's like I've literally been like, oh, I'm sorry I didn't do my homework, and it's like, all right, let's hit the purge bucket for a good half an hour, and then it's like, okay, I'm good. At least it wasn't 6 hours like it was my first couple of years,
Right. Wow.
So yeah.
That's absolutely amazing.
So I got an
kids
interesting.
Go out and no, just kidding. Go ahead, Mel.
Do you want to take a break before I ask him the next question? Is it about
we'll
break
do the
time?
question first. And it's almost about break time, but whatever. Hey, it's my show. Keep going.
Well, I mean, it might take him a second to actually answer the question, so I didn't want to break up the question with a break.
Oh, no, we won't do that. No, go ahead. Let us continue. We've got a
All
good
right.
flow going on. I don't want to break it up.
What exactly, in your own words and in your honest perception here, your point of view. What made you write the book that you wrote? What put you on the path to actually type out and write out the book that you wrote? What exactly was it about these experiences and about maybe how you happened upon these experiences also that made you write this book and put this experience out there and this knowledge out there for people to grasp?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when I was a kid, I used to do the MS Readathon. Have you guys ever heard of that?
I have not heard of this.
Yeah. It's like a fundraiser that kids do at elementary and middle schools to raise money for multiple sclerosis by gaining sponsorships. Say, I'll read 50 books and you give me a quarter a book. So I used to go through my neighborhood and get people to sponsor me to read 50 books in like 3 months, and they would give me a certain amount of money. It would all go to multiple sclerosis, and at the end of the ordeal, I would get a Nintendo or something.
Yeah.
You know, like the prize. You get some kind of prize, and of course it's something completely unhealthy compared to reading.
Hey, even Nintendo has its purpose, okay?
Well, I mean, I was ingesting mushrooms in Mario Brothers. I mean, maybe that's something. So.
Well, hey, there you go. There's a little bit of symbolism in everything.
Well, I think from an early age, my connection to reading and writing, those were my favorite subjects in school. And I remember, you know, whether it was connecting my talent for these things to healing in the MS readathons, or if it was something else like. I remember when I was on family vacation, I remember the first time my dad ever asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and it seemed like a very important sort of professional moment between the two of us. And so I said, well, I want to be an author. And that was what I wanted from an early age. In college, I studied philosophy, and I thought I was going to go to law school. And that, you know, that was all part of being an ultra fundamentalist Christian. And then that was maybe a little mean, but anyway, I went on and I went to graduate school, both a master's degree and then a Master of Fine Arts degree in memoir writing. And I just had a deep love for the art of you know, my dad's sermons were like creative nonfiction essays. And I really loved the style. I always loved it. And I loved writing essays that were personal yet informational, and I just loved nonfiction. And so I studied it. And in my first year of studying, it was when I was in Michigan and living in my parents' cottage and had the mushroom experience. And I created an independent study in travel writing as a way of using student loan money to get myself down to Peru. So that was my strategy. And
That's a good
I
strategy.
think
we are on the radio, man.
yeah, I know, right? And I'm all paranoid too because I've been watching The Wire, which is this anyway. And so.
By the way, I'm on a list. You should probably know that. Maybe I should told you that before
yeah,
the
exactly.
show. Sorry.
So, oh God! Well, I ended up turning the project, which was about a 100-page travel journal, into my thesis project, which ended up being about like a 250-page kind of way over the top. Like I didn't need to write that much, but I was just obsessed with this incredible experience. So I wrote this book, and it won Thesis of the Year and gave me some clout to get a fellowship for an MFA program. And then in the MFA program, I just thought, well, what am I going to do but just turn this into a book? And along the way, I can't say exactly what possessed me, other than it had always been a dream to write a book. And that I felt like the story that I had to share was like what is my generation, like people who are my age, like 25 through 35, like what is our generation's like coming of age story? You know, I mean, like a generation before me, it was like the Basketball Diaries of like Tobias Wolff's This Boy's Life. Like there was some really good coming of age stories, but like I haven't felt moved by anyone my age really writing maybe Dave Eggers, but he's pretty cynical, and I just wanted something. I could write a coming of age story that rejuvenates the fact that coming of age is about initiation into this universal understanding of heart and self and other, and I can share that with the world. And all my professors, not all of them, but a number of them told me, like, this is nothing that's ever going to get published because psychedelics are over, the 60s are over. And I just kept plugging away because I really felt like, no, listen, this is not like your typical psychedelic trip. This is something, this thing that's going on in the Amazon is something else. And
who's laughing
and
now?
I can't help but think that sometimes, yeah. But I at any rate, that's kind of I guess how it all came together.
So the dominoes were just laid down in your favor around the cipher, and when it got to you, you just screamed it out, domino, MF.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I had some great, like realitysandwich.com, which is this web magazine I had started writing for while I was in my MFA program, and they were great supporters of this kind of literature and started through Daniel Pinchbeck, who had written these books, Breaking Open the Head, and also a book called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. And they were looking for authors to help, kind of create and these guys came from, like Ken Jordan, the publisher, whose father, Fred, was the one of the publishers of, or chief editors of Grove Press and published all the Beats. And so it's a rich literary tradition wrapped up in this crazy online magazine called Reality Sandwich, and they really helped me when I moved to New York to help the book find a home. It was a really great marriage of creative projects.
Yeah, the sister DCS actually introduced me to Evolver and Reality Sandwich online magazines, which I think is a very good source of material, mind-expanding material that people, if they read a little bit more of it, perhaps the box would open a little bit more and they could find their escape,
It's strange stuff, too, isn't it?
I love that site. It's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I have to have Martin Ball on the show. I have to talk to this guy. I'm obsessed now.
Yeah.
Martin Ball's great. He would be a great guest for you guys.
I definitely, I'm going to have to shoot him an email, because after I read that article, not the most recent one, the one before that, about his take on ethogens and how his way is the only way, I was just completely fascinated. I'm like, I have to talk to this guy. Whether I agree with him or not, I simply have to talk to him. It's great. All right, so
awesome.
we're gonna go ahead. It's like a couple minutes after the top of the hour. We're only a little late, so we're gonna take a quick break. You are in the Mind of DCS on the Soup Media Network. We are talking with Adam and the awesome Mel Chisadek. We're having a great time. I think we're having way too much fun talking about mushrooms and ceremonies and all kinds of awesome things. So don't go anywhere.
The internet is not a brochure rack. You can't create a website like you'd create a brochure. Print it once, never update it. You've got to treat your website content like a business asset. But face it, you don't have time to focus on your web content. Turn it over to Ion Leap. We're an internet marketing agency who helps companies get found by search engines using robust content. Bring your website content to life. Learn more at ionleap.com.
I'm Dr. Claude Windenberger. I'm the inventor and still sole facilitator of the unconditional freedom process. And you're listening to In the Mind of DCS.
systems are functional.
And you're going to pass the reins to Mr. Jackal, the new king of radio.
This is the Oz Man, one of the voices in the Jackal's head.
Are we alone in the universe?
Now, I'm a voice of the Jackal's head. Biggest creature.
Is there life after death?
I'm Nick Pope, and now I'm a voice inside the Jackal's head.
Is the government keeping secrets from us?
This is Stephen Bassett, and I am now a voice inside the Jackal's head.
Will the Cubs ever win the World Series?
I am now a voice inside the Jackal's head.
And that was Lloyd Pye.
And who the hell are these voices inside my head? Listen live on the Jackal's Head and find out.
Greetings, Earthlings. I am for the planet Zordon. Watch my friends, Ennis, Crenshaw, and Rick Osman, down unraveling the secrets, right here on the Soup Media Network each Saturday at midnight Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific, and each Sunday at noon Eastern. They will bring you interesting guests and information from all over, about, or inside your pathetic little planet. Oh my, I've misplaced my tinfoil derby.
We are back on In the Mind of DCS. Mel Chisedek was singing to us. You missed it. I really thought about cutting the commercial off early and pressing the button so you all could hear Mel Chisedek sing to us, but I was nice. I did not.
Why,
Ladies and gentlemen,
you.
welcome back. I know. Next time I'm going to get you, though. Welcome back to In the Mind of DCS. We are having a really phenomenal discussion with my co-host Mel Chisedek and Adam Elenbass. He's the author of Fisheries of Men, and the only reason that I don't say your subtitle, Adam, is because I'm not going to try to pronounce that word because I am horrible at it. So you can tell everybody the subtitle of your book.
It is The Fishers of Men, the Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest.
There we go. And we are talking with Adam about his journey and how he got into this. So if you haven't heard the first hour of the show, shame on you. You're just going to have to hit it on the archives. We're not talking about it again. I'm just kidding. But there is something that we wanted to clear up. We were talking about it on the break, and we were just having this really awesome discussion about Adam's experiences with ayahuasca down in the Amazon and the shamans and the medicine men and how this can be a really awesomely transformational experience. But it can be a little rough, too, because you are releasing, you're going through this energetic detox. You're releasing a lot of just negative energy, negative habits, your fears, all that kind of stuff pop up. So, Adam, for the kids at home who maybe are curious about this and aren't going to be able to go down to the Amazon and find a shaman, what would be your suggestion to them?
Right. Well, I mean, I learned the hard way, and that way was, like I said, I had some initial psychedelic experiences at home that were recreational that turned out to be very wonderful. But the other part of the story that is also pretty common is that people can, if they're not in the right frame of mind, if they're not in the right setting, if they're not with the right people. If they're simply not prepared to face the amount of stuff that can come up without a shaman there or some kind of therapist or adult or babysitter who can really give love and also hold space for someone's transformational process, which is a complete therapeutic art. And it can become
by hold space.
By hold space, I mean, when someone's really, really freaking out, really terrified, and maybe screaming or thrashing or whatever, can you remain peaceful and calm? And because you are going to be the source of that energy for them, and that's a large thing to ask of someone who says, "Yeah, I'll make sure that you don't freak out." Because what ends up happening is people get scared by it. I mean, it's just a common thing. If someone's really freaking out, you get scared, and what that does is it absolutely doesn't help the person who's going through it. Now that's something that a shaman does. A shaman is like very stoic and very centered, and they hold that space of peace and calmness amidst the storm for the entire mesa. So my point is just to say that that journeying with psychedelics is powerful. But there is a reason that for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, that this has been done in the container of a very grounded ritual with a very advanced, adept practitioner. And I say that because I worked with schizophrenics here in New York City, and a lot of them had serious breaks because of the mismatching of different drugs and psychedelics, and these aren't things to be toyed with. These aren't things to like, oh, you can just meet yourself and meet God, and so I'm just going to take mushrooms and that's what's going to happen. It's kind of a crapshoot when you're outside of the container of a ceremony. And so my advice is for people to, find an appropriate ceremonial context and one that's very safe, with people who know what they're doing. Not that it's going to spell your doom if you don't, but I've had experiences on the flip side of the wonderful mushroom experience that I described where, I really literally thought I was going to die all night, and there was nobody there to help me. It was a horrendous and absolutely traumatizing experience, and it ended up being one of the very experiences, no different than cocaine or any of the other things that I ended up having to release in the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So, psychedelics aren't all just magic medicine. They are powerful things that can be used as a tool for healing and awakening. But without that, it's like something that can also do some deep trauma to the psyche. So you have to be very, very careful with these things. And I don't advocate the recreational use. And in my own life, I don't smoke marijuana. I don't take any psychedelics recreationally. The only thing that I do is I still participate in ayahuasca ceremonies, and because it's like yoga. It's a very serious spiritual practice. So I say all of that just so that people listening don't think I was just advocating that we just pop something psychedelic and go scream in the woods and you'll meet God or something.
Well, I think it's very important that if someone does choose to go this route, that they do have what's termed as a spirit guide, someone to guide you just in case you stray off the path and need to kind of be brought back or calmed down in any sort of way, someone that's experienced.
Absolutely. But and I've heard that warning, I just want to call it a warning, in all kinds of things. For example, I've read that if you do smoke a lot of marijuana, and then you want to go meditate, to also be careful, because there are times that you can just, put yourself in an experience that you're not ready for. You kind of force the issue. It's kind of like playing with magic and have no idea what you're doing. You just might zap yourself or something along those lines.
Well, the shamans have a great, opinion about this, and that's that when you take a plant medicine into your body, and the chemical situation is, to me, a far trickier thing to discuss, but in terms of just organic substances that are psychedelic in nature, or, mind manifesting, if you take these things, you literally will come into contact with plant spirits. It's no different than understanding that you are what you eat. That's why so many people who are eating, dairy that's loaded with tons of hormones and antibiotics are developing problems, because the energy of what was put into the dairy is coming through in the body. So the same thing is true of plants. These things have a vital life force, and if you just approach these things with no reverence, thinking that it's some inanimate chemical compound that's just going to do X, Y, and Z, buckle up, because these things totally they're conscious, and they'll talk to you, and that you can literally talk to the spirit of the plant that you're communing with. And I think a lot of people encounter that, but they have no idea what it is. It's just this feeling that something a little bit alien is inside of them. And I mean, talk about freak you out if you don't have a shaman there saying, "Oh yeah, that's the spirit of the Wairikaspi plant. It's just talking to you."
Yeah.
It's a really helpful thing to have around.
I think, and it makes sense too, because I would think that even in this type of ceremony, you'll see things in a way that you can understand. So your eyes are seeing it and your brain is translating it one way. So you talking to this spirit plant might manifest to you as something completely different. So I can completely understand people freaking out, because you have no idea what this is. It's not like he just comes and says, "Hi, I'm the plant you just ate." And even if he did, you'd be like, WTF.
And it really takes time. You gotta spend time with the plants in a deep, reverent state of conscious meditation with the spirit of the plant before, in my experience anyway, before you access exactly what you just said, which is a more or less transparent like communication, like, oh, you are a bit of plant intelligence that I'm communicating with right now. Until you get to the point where you understand the entity, a lot of the times it will disguise itself because it's you're projecting your lack of understanding onto the plant spirit that you're talking to. And so it will appear as many different things until you sift through and come into a sort of more holistic understanding of, like, I just took a plant into my body and it's altered my consciousness greatly, and of course that's because it's a conscious entity.
Yeah. Well, like it said in so many different languages throughout so many, I guess, thousands of years, or however someone wants to look at it, but when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And it goes the same with these experiences. If you are not ready yet, or still learning, or still absorbing what it is that the spirit of the plant, or however you consider it, is trying to teach you, then when you're ready, that's when the teacher will come.
I completely agree with that as well.
I think the important thing about this thing is why we were having a really fascinating time, talking about it. And a lot of the stories were completely hilarious. In retrospect, I'm sure it probably wasn't funny at all at the time. That we have to go into these kinds of things with a kind of an amount of respect and reverence and an understanding of kind of our own humility. And even though our ego can be very loud at times, this is a transformational process. So you really have to respect that and the things about it that you don't know. You simply don't know because you haven't experienced it yet. So I think we just want to advocate y'all doing this stuff safe, okay? We don't want nobody to take some mushrooms and flip out and be like DCS and Adam told me to. So,
That's right.
Don't choose an said it was okay. Definitely. So now let's shift the conversation just a little bit here. How did you get into astrology? Where did that come in?
Well, I mean, right. It's really fascinating. Well, first of all, we should say initially that there are a lot of misconceptions about what astrology is or what astrologers do, and I want to clear that away if I could, just right from the get-go.
Let's do it.
So, I mean, there's basically what I would say. There's a very large, perception that astrologers are fortune tellers, and that astrologers are people who look at the transits in the sky and look at the chart when you were born and basically tell you more or less what's going to happen to you or what has happened to you. Or they can tell you, they can read you, they can say, oh, I know where you've been and all of this. In fact, that is one aspect to astrology. There has been a history of astrologers who have, with some amount of precision and like expertise, been able to accurately predict the outcomes of situations or possible times of death. And I mean, it's a whole different side of the story, though, and that's a particular type of divination that I'm personally not invested in, and I don't really have an opinion about because it's just never called to me. But the second type of astrology, the one that I practice and that we teach at Nightlight Astrology, the school that I direct here in Manhattan, and my own private practice, is all what we call archetypal astrology or evolutionary astrology, which is where we're trying to look at the thematic, energetic, matrix of what a soul is dealing with. And what a soul deals with is the language of it is mythological and archetypal, meaning there are core meanings that never change, while the expressions of those things can vary greatly day to day, month to month, year to year. So you might come into this lifetime, and like, one of the things, for example, in my own chart that I'm dealing with is a sort of issue in my lifetime is really trying to figure out the place where, male masculine and taking pride in one's autonomous masculinity meets the discipline and sort of asceticism of being a religious person. Like that archetype of trying to figure out what it means to do all of that without pride, without ego, without, that's like a big highlight of my chart. For other people, it's more about, it's other things. It's like, It could be sexuality. It could be monogamous relationships. It could be raising children or working with children. Who knows? There's so many things that can show up in a chart, but it gives you an archetypal picture of what's going on. So that school of astrology is really interested in exploring the dynamics of what it is that a soul comes to work on, or what a soul carries with it. We call that karma, but all it really means is patterns. Patterns of cause and effect that a soul brings with it into the lifetime. Or if, let's say, you don't believe in eternal soul that came from somewhere else and is going to somewhere else, then it's just an imprint, a blueprint of the energy patterns that you're dealing with. So that's the kind of astrology that I practice and that I'm interested in. And it's really bound up in understanding the archetypes of the planets. And the way that I got into all of this was that I started to have visions in ayahuasca ceremonies with regard to both the zodiac, the natural path of the sun and moon, and also with some of the archetypes of the planets as they were sort of out of balance in my life. For example, I had a ceremony where I had this image of, the Venus on the half-shell painting. You guys know that one?
Mm-hmm.
So Venus on the half shell, and I was very clearly like, that's Venus. And I was also seeing like a slow sort of beautiful planet, and just like, wow, this is Venus. This is like the archetype of Venus. But the Venus on the half shell painting was sort of like decaying and eroding. And I just understood by the colors and the energy of the painting and the planet that in my own life, and then I was seeing kind of almost like that was like the center jewel archetype of this mandala of images that started to generate that all had to do with Venetian decay, which is, Venus teaches us how to love and enjoy the material world, how to relate to other people and love, but in a more sensual, romantic, day-to-day way, whereas the moon is perhaps a little deeper, more soul-felt, or Neptune is more spiritual, mystical love, but Venus is like day-to-day, sensual, physical world love. And I was seeing that like the amount of crappy food and emotional eating and addiction and all of this kind of, out of whack, Venetian side to my life. It was like basically materialism. And of course, I came to recognize later that I had a very strong, these things stick with you. And, of course, someone says astrology later on, and you think, I've had a few visions of like weird kind of astrological symbolism, and so I'm going to start looking up, what does this stuff mean? And just little by little, I started getting curious. And as I began to study my natal chart, we'll come to find out one of the leading planets in my chart that's sort of afflicted is related to Venus. So, it was these kinds of experiences that really woke me up to sort of saying, there's something to this. And I had more and more and more. Like the more that I opened the system of astrology in my mind to the system, the more that my ayahuasca experiences and the visions of those experiences started to revolve around the archetypes and images of these planets, which is education to me that is, completely priceless compared to the books. Maybe second to like having a really wonderful teacher, which is difficult because there's 10,000, they say about 10,000 practicing astrologers in all of North America.
Oh, wow.
So, this was a slow, steady process of understanding psychological and spiritual, complexes with regard to symbols, myths, allegories, legends, and that's what astrology is. Astrology is the study of the behavioral kind of karmic complexes we have as they relate to really ancient images.
Yeah. Well, I have two questions for you that actually relate to that subject right there. And one of them is somewhat of a statement, but I want to say something before that is, I've said for a long time that the two greatest teachers are spirit and nature. You can learn the most from them. You can learn more than you'll ever learn in a university from spirit and nature. And the first thing I would like to pose to you, which is somewhat of a statement, also a question, is How do you feel about the references to astrology in the Old Testament of the Bible? And has that had an influence since your upbringing was somewhat of the type of upbringing that you had anyway? And also, how does the new quote unquote sign play in your personal perspective? Does it play in at all?
The new sign? Oh, the new sign. I see.
Okay.
Yeah. So good questions. The first one I would say, like, there's a great story in I think it's Exodus. Is Exodus the book where we have the story of Joseph and the Pharaoh?
Yes.
I think that's Exodus. Yeah. In this story, I read the Bible last year cover to cover for the first time since, like, growing up and in Bible classes in college and stuff, and it was really cool to read it again. And I recently ran into this guy the other day, a Jewish guy we were talking about the Torah and just having a great conversation about the Old Testament. And one of the things that came up was this story about Joseph, who was an interpreter of dreams, and when he came into like Pharaoh's court, the Pharaoh had this question about a dream that he had, and to interpret the dream, was going to be really challenging because all of Pharaoh's astrologers and necromancers and everything had failed to interpret this dream, and Joseph comes in and interprets it brilliantly and very quickly, and there was something about Joseph's interpretation that was very different than the court astrologer's interpretation, and that was this. So in the dream, Pharaoh had, there were 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows, and they were in a meadow, and the 7 skinny cows ate the 7 fat cows. And of course, all of Pharaoh's people are saying, "Oh, you're going to have 7 years of a drought, and it's going to be really terrible. There's going to be no famine, and there's going to be no food, and all this stuff." And then Joseph comes in because Pharaoh's not pleased with that answer, and Joseph comes in and he says, the implication is a little bit different. Joseph says, "Well, if they were there, this is the implication here. You're reading between the lines a little bit, but I loved this, this particular interpretation that this Jewish guy was telling me that his rabbi taught, the kind of a mystical rabbi." And he said that Joseph's interpretation is, well, no, the 7 skinny cows eating the 7 fat cows mean 7 years of good crops and then 7 years of famine. And let me tell you that here is the way to avoid this. And he says, stock up during the 7 good years so that during the 7 bad years you have enough to last. Mm-hmm. And so there was this space, there was a difference between the type of divination that the court astrologers were practicing, which was fatalistic. And whereas Joseph, seemed to be able, for example, if I was doing astrology in that particular session, in that particular description of that dream, I would say, well, the fact that those 7 cows were all together in a meadow at one time existing simultaneously means that these 14 years can exist simultaneously, side by side, which is it is an option that exists prior to the fatalistic part of the dream where the 7 skinny eat the 7 fat. So point being that as an astrologer, the most important thing I think we're charged with is, as Carl Jung said, to understand that consciousness is the fulcrum upon which fate and free will are balanced. So bringing consciousness to a person's life is so much more important than telling them what their fate is, because with consciousness we can work with the mechanics of the natural world, and there are mechanics. The moon moves in and out with the tides, and the sun has, we have a path around the sun, and there are mechanics in the universe. But to the degree that we have consciousness in our life, we can work with those things to generate, more love and more truth, I think.
The music of the spheres, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the I guess, so to answer the first part of the question, it's it is strange to me, for example, that, not to say, throughout the Old Testament, astrology is definitely sort of bemoaned, but, there are interpreters of dreams among the Jews. There are magicians among the Jews. There are miracle workers among the Jews. Yeah. And so, just like Jedis and Darth Vaders, like this force can be harnessed in ways that sort of represent a more shadowy, sinister side, and in a way that can bring, something of value and worth on the spiritual path.
Yes. The purpose in asking that question wasn't really to see where you stand on it, but was to see how you relate that to other people. Perhaps a Christian comes to you wanting to know something of their astrology, but their, pastor or priest is like, astrology, like the most common, stereotype the preachers will say that's, it's not good to go and deal with astrology or whatever, but it says in the Old Testament of the Bible and also the New Testament, Revelations, it also has references, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. There's references to, Jesus himself says that there will be signs in the stars and in the heavens,
Yes.
And not to mention that there were literally magicians, the root word magi, magicians from the Far East who followed a star to find Jesus. So
the three
that's
magi,
natal astrology at its best, So, I think standing is that we look at the planets and the stars and the movements as essentially evidence of God's communication to us, and the fact that it's predictable is sort of like evidence that someone's on the other end of the telephone.
Yes.
The fact that we have free will, I think, and that we can interact with the person on the other end of the telephone or with the cosmos that is ordered is something that has produced like great awe and wonder and fear in astrologers and avatars, and that's really I agree with you 100%. The natural world and spirit, just observing the movement of life and learning from that movement. So such a lost art in some ways.
Yes. Well, there's a difference between knowing and memorizing from a book and actually knowing from inside, knowing in your heart. And that right there is a way of actually educating yourself without having to, be indoctrinated by something that is trying to almost bring you away from that inner knowing of yourself and to put focus on the outer knowing, if you will. Just in my perception, that's kind of how it is. I look at it anyway.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that one thing I tell my students a lot and my clients, and they say, "Do you look at your astrology chart every day to figure out what's going to happen?" And I say, "No, I usually look at it when I feel confused about something, and it's not that I look at it for an answer. It's more that if I could." I would, if I weren't living in New York City, I would maybe look a little bit at my natal chart, but I'd also probably just go for a walk in the woods and actually literally look at the stars,
Yes.
So, and that's where it all came from, was people, what do we do? Where do we go? How do we lead? How do we live? And look, I think the astrological answer at its base is sit back and watch the way things move and change, and some of the answers can come by doing that.
Oh, yes. Well, there's a famous line, and we actually said it last week on the show, that millionaires don't have astrologers, but billionaires do.
Yeah, it's very true. You wouldn't believe the amount of Wall Street clients that I get who essentially want me to help them gamble.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always difficult to be like, yeah, homie, don't play that,
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. So, what are you? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No. Go, Mel.
Oh, I was just going to ask him about the Ophiuchus and if that changed anything in the way he works his tools, uses his tools.
This was really, not much gets me kind of pissed off. I'm not really I'm not easy to make super mad. probably like you guys do, I'm just pretty easygoing. If there's the ability to chat about something for a ridiculously long period of time, then I'm there. Otherwise, I'm probably at home, just hanging out. So
he said pissed off.
So it's like this story, this news story, like kind of made me mad because it was posed as news, and this is not news at all. This is absolute. Secondly, it was broadcasted by an astronomer, not an astrologer.
Now, what is the difference? Because I'm sure that a lot of laymen don't understand. Like, don't you both look at the stars? Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, well, I mean, the major difference, and I'm not going to say this is like across the board true, but astronomers, first of all, grew out of astrology. So the whole idea of being able to predict uniform movements in the heavens, mathematics, physics, all of these things very wrapped up in astrology. And so astronomy, of course, most astronomers are 10 times smarter about the math and the physical laws and the science of our solar system. I'll say that right away. I'll give them that. They totally win. But on the other hand, the thing that astronomers, because of, and this is we could talk a whole conversation about the discovery of Uranus around the scientific Enlightenment period that seemed to, Uranus is sort of a trickster energy, and anyway, I'm not going to go into that. Okay, so, sorry, it's just it would be like too long. So, but at any rate, during the scientific, Enlightenment period, we came into, science has always been about innovation, about breaking boundaries and about taking us to the next level. And that kind of stopped when the scientific Enlightenment happened, which is ironic because we came up with some of our best science. We came up with the scientific method. I mean, everything about science became so sharp and so crisp. And, Einstein wouldn't have been able to do what he was able to do if it weren't for the scientific revolution. So I don't dog it. But what's happened as a result is we have a large community of people who don't realize that they actually belong to a religion, and it's called scientific materialism. Sort of secular scientific materialism. Its charge against something like astrology is that, man's consciousness is being projected onto the cosmos in astrology, and we assume that because we're meaning-making creatures, that the rest of the universe is meaningful, and that's actually just a product of probably some random brain chemistry and, chaos theory and chance or something like that. And it is absolutely absurd to the astrologer that assumption was made, because that assumption is not scientific. That assumption is an assumption. And we have no reason to think that a meaningful universe would not have produced meaning-making creatures. We have no reason to think that a conscious universe couldn't have created conscious, self-conscious creatures, or consciousness throughout all things. And science can't prove that that's not true. And this is a point that they really refuse to talk about. Many scientists, including one of my best friends who's worked for NASA, and he's a chemist and, is making batteries for the Mars rover. And like if I get into a conversation with him about astrology, it usually ends about two sentences in with, "That's all fake. There's nothing real about that." So you're talking about a form of dogmatism that, okay, sure, it displaced the dogmatism of the Catholic Church, but it inserted a new form of dogmatism which disenchanted the cosmos. And that's a form of magic, to put a spell over people that says you are alone in this meaning, in this consciousness, until we prove otherwise. That is a great lie that I think has been sold to people. And I really feel like it's been sold in the face of science gives us so many great commodities. It gives us so many great products. Yeah, but how does it go back to what it was once, which is that it expands us and teaches us how to grow and evolve as people?
Yes, yeah.
And so when an astronomer, this is ironic because I'm from Minnesota, and this University of Minnesota professor comes on board saying, well, there's this 13th sign, and there's this sidereal vision of the zodiac, and so and kind of tongue in cheek. So your sign has changed, ha ha ha. I don't really give two craps about your sign, but I'm presenting you with this information. believe in astrology. That's really what was being said. And the answer to that is that there have been two major schools of astrology that have very different points of view about the zodiac and how it's referenced for a long, long time, many, thousands of years since the Babylonians.
Mm-hmm.
And these two major points of view have to do with, well, what is the significance of the actual constellations? Like that constellation we call Aries, and when the sun moves through it, then we're in Aries. But to the Western tropical point of view, the zodiac reference points are not, it's not important that they be exactly correlated to the stars of the constellations originally named, because the point was that the constellation was being ascribed to a point in the sky that matched up with the spring equinox. So the spring equinox is Aries to the Western tropical system, right? The summer solstice is Cancer, the fall equinox is Libra, and the winter solstice is Capricorn. The stars were placed by the meanings and names of the zodiac constellations were placed by human beings over the tops of these stars, not vice versa. It's not as if Aries, objective to humans placing its meaning upon it, was the zodiacal reference point.
Yeah.
So that's a major school of debate. Like the sidereal point of view, which says no, these constellations are actually like energy centers. And that's the Vedic point of view, the sidereal view, and they're much more concerned with like the stars as reference points, whereas the Western point of view is more concerned with the sun and its relationship to the earth at the equinoxes and solstices as the zodiac reference points. This was all presented, A, as if one side of the debate was truer than another, and B, as if it were news, when it's been a major debate between two schools of astrology for several thousand years.
Well, isn't it also
in his voice too. It's awesome.
Yeah, I don't get angry that often, but this story I got like 50 emails from people like, I'm not a Virgo. I swear to God, I'm not a Virgo.
Well, what really got me is they say there's a new sign. Well, there's been schools of thought for I don't know how long that said there originally was 13 signs before the calendar change. And if that really doesn't play a part in it in my eyes, because that's not going to change the language of the birthday itself.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right about that, and I also think that there are reasons why 12 was used. 12 was used because it was it's a holy number, and also because it evenly divides a circle of 360 degrees into 30-degree vectors, and 13 isn't a number that divides the zodiac in a clean way. That doesn't mean there's not 13 constellations either. There's the potential for constellations could go up to as many as you want to make.
That's right.
So I guess we could say that the names that we call these things is pretty much immaterial. When you get an astrology reading, it really is about the interpretation of certain things.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. For example, a wonderful illustration from the chart of the United States. The rising sign of the United States is thought to be in Sagittarius. This is from a chart taken on the July 4th, 1776, at about 5 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. So, according to this chart, which I think is a very accurate USA chart, the nation's birth chart is a Sagittarius rising and a Gemini descending. What does that mean? Archetypally, what that would mean is that Sagittarius, in a great way, is about religious freedom. So the rising sign, one of the ways that we see ourselves from our very birth, was, in a sense, about religious freedom, expansive religious growth. The expansive growth of a man's place in the universe, right? That's all very Sagittarian. However, on the descendant is Gemini. Gemini represents our shadow side, right? What is our shadow side? Well, it's the sign of the twins, Castor and Pollux, who are thought to represent the sort of, the yin and the yang. It's like, this is me and this is the devil on my shoulder, the angel on one shoulder, the devil on the other, the good versus bad, the right versus wrong. What has America's shadow been? It's always been about the polarization of ourselves and other people. For as great as our religious freedom has been, the archetype we've struggled with in our shadow has been the binary, oppositional relationships to other nations. Seeing ourselves as the angel or liberator, while the other is the sort of devil or the axis of evil or that's a big deal. So these are that's just a brief example from like the USA's chart, but those things are the core of what astrology is trying to get at, more than quibbling about what is the exact position of this or that. When you get down, if the description, the archetypal description fits, there's a resonance between you and your client, and that's really what's important. It doesn't mean you throw out the system, but it means that there are several different ways of perceiving consciousness in relationship to the geometry and the sort of hard physics of the universe, and either way is a medium for exploration.
Mm. So it basically is boiled down to perception. If two people are born on the same day and they get the same reading, they could perceive it differently due to their circumstances and situations. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and what kind of choices they make, what environment they grow up in, what's the culture like that they grew up in, and so it can vary vastly. Like another area of the USA's chart is that Sagittarius is intercepted in the 12th house. So just a brief explanation. For as religiously free as we are, the thing that has always represented to me as an astrologer is the fact that the United States, for being so religiously open, there is some kind of weird way in which we refuse to open ourselves up to the beauty and religious truths of other cultures. Like, here's this religious freedom experiment, right? Yet we snub our noses at the way that other societies deal with healthcare. We snub our noses at the way other societies take siestas during the afternoon and don't kill themselves in their work week. I mean, there's so many things about other cultures that is representative of Sagittarius in the 12th house, of like secrets or things that we're not quite aware of within ourselves. So, our religious freedom could expand if we got to know other cultures more intimately. That's another feature of the USA's chart.
Yeah.
I love the awesome definition that you provided. We've had astrologers on before, but I particularly like your unique view of this. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a very good view.
Yeah, definitely. So could you say then that when we're talking about the astrology that there are times when you can take advantage of certain energies, but again, if an astrologer gives you a reading and say next week will be a good time to do this, that, and the other, it's not set in stone that that's what you have to do. It's just that, it would be an optimal time. Like, if you do this, it might work out a little bit better than usual type deal.
Absolutely. Like, under new moons, it's age-old wisdom farmers have known for a long time that as a new moon, you plant a seed. And some time later, through a number of moon cycles, around a full moon, you'll probably see it blossom. Maybe we're talking about a nightshade. I don't know. But like the timing of movements of things essentially has to do with yin and yang energy, which is a big part of astrology as well. The four elements play into astrology, earth, water being yin, fire, air being yang. And these moments of time where you see, okay, like for example, this week, Mars moved into my midheaven, the place of my career, in Aquarius. Now, obviously, I'm an astrologer, which is very kind of weird Aquarian thing to be for a career. And I'm a writer who writes about strange things like ayahuasca. So very Aquarian type of public image that I have in my midheaven. And as Mars moves into my midheaven, I get this idea very suddenly that I would like to start a fundraising drive because since I do everything by donation, the startup costs from the company have the company in the red. And I just thought, why not just reach out to the community and tell them where things are at and ask for a fundraising drive and just go and get it done. And within a few days, as Mars is transiting through my midheaven, I was able to generate this. Now, does that mean I could have spent time being pissed off about the fact that I was in the red and projecting that as anger on people? Mars would be represented that as well. But I found this out, again, as an astrologer. I look at my transits, but I don't sit and obsess over them as like diagnostic gambling tools. These are symbols that we need to use to understand the choices that we make. And so usually when someone is in a reading and they're saying like, well, I'm thinking of starting something new in the spring, and I'm thinking of writing a new book, I might say something like, oh, well, the new moon of April 3rd is going to be really powerful. A lot of Mars Aries energy in that new moon, so very good time to start something new. I might sort of say something like that, but if they say, well, will it be successful? I'm like, I don't know. It depends on how much effort you put into it, or it depends on, it depends on a lot of things. So it's not like, Richard Tarnas says astrologers, who sort of predict the future are sort of either wounded or like attempting to wound somebody. So, these are divination devices that we use to understand the present moment. Much like throwing the I Ching doesn't really do anything but help you understand your own consciousness at the very moment that you do the reading. Exactly. So astrology is
yeah, no. I want to interrupt you because we're running short on time, and I just want to get into very briefly, your company, Nightlight Astrology, is donation-based. Why?
Well, I mean, I had a strange kind of series of visions that helped me in ayahuasca ceremonies that helped me leave my job as a therapist because I wasn't happy with my work, and I took the sort of brave, like, okay, I'm just going to leave and see what happens, and all these series of events happened. I was unemployed, and then I had some more sort of ceremonial experiences, and I said, you know what, I'm going to open up an archetypal astrology counseling practice, and I'm going to open up a school, and I'm going to develop this curriculum, and I'm going to let people study this stuff and come for this counseling and just learn about this stuff from whatever point that they're, at in terms of their budget. Like, whatever they have to give is whatever they have to give, because God knows that with this, especially in the USA's chart and in the world at large, we are going through a pretty much, complete transformation of the way we do things economically, and the whole way of gambling, which is what credit cards are all about, which is what taking out loans to pay for an education is about, or a house. It's all a calculated gamble. Will I be able to generate income enough to pay this back? And and I'll just get everything I need to be set up, and then once I'm set up, I'll start to pay it back and live this happy life. But that's a gamble that's based on living outside of our current situation and somewhere in the future. That is astrology at its worst in the same way. So I thought, well, what better way to learn about astrology than by allowing people to learn about it by not going into debt? Because otherwise astrology, the way it's learned and brought into the body and mind, will be the same model of living outside of one's means, and then we won't understand the natural rhythms of things at all. So this was my inspiration, and I just said, okay, well, universe, if this is how it's really meant to be, if this is a new form of economy or way of doing things, then you've got to support me, because I'm going to bust my balls doing this, 24/7, and so please just support me. I don't need to thrive materially. I just need to persist and take care of myself. So, and that's, I just been we opened in July. I've had 200 plus clients, and we have 20 students in the school, and I am not thriving materially. I'm living modestly, but I am persisting, and I'm doing what I love. So that is, I think, a new model that I hope that we show people, both in the counseling sessions and just through what we're doing as a company.
That's phenomenal. That is absolutely phenomenal. Adam, how can they get in touch with you? If somebody wants an astrology reading, they want to get a hold of the book, they want to go through one of these ceremonies with you, how do we do this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's two ways to get in touch with what I'm up to. First is fishersofmenbook.com. fishersofmenbook.com is my website for the book, and it's got some editorial criticism and praise, and it's got some a way to order. You can get it on Amazon or Borders or Barnes & Noble or whatever. And then nightlightastrology.com. It's NIGHTLIGHT, nightlight, like the little thing you keep in your room at night. And so nightlightastrology.com. And there people can schedule a donation-based 1-hour astrological consultation, and just be prepared to not have your future told, but to talk about your life and whatever you're up to, and to understand yourself in a deeper way. And then there's the training course that's online. People can check that out. We're currently doing a fundraising drive right now. We've earned about $6,000 in like 3 days. We're trying to get to about 10 or 11 to pay off the startup costs that were involved in the company this year. And so if people feel like getting a reading and donating, everything's going right now to just making sure that Nightlight can run purely by donation for like 2011.
Phenomenal. That is absolutely phenomenal. Right. Everybody, definitely go and get a reading from Adam. I got one. It was great. It was very enlightening. It was a great conversation about stuff that's going on. So, actually, you know what? I wish we had recorded it. Did you record it, Adam? No. Wish we had.
Yeah, it's definitely like there's. Yeah, come back, get another one. We'll try to record it on Skype or something.
Yeah, no, I can record it on Skype. I wasn't thinking. I was just too excited. So whatever. We'll do it again. Absolutely.
I may have to make an appointment.
Yes, you should, Melchizedek. He's good.
I was just gonna say you actually.
Conversation.
Yeah, you had such great things to say. I may have to schedule one with you.
It's good stuff. I'm taking
man, I'm so thankful for you guys having me.
I am. Yes, absolutely. And thank you for coming on. We've had a great conversation, really had a great time talking to you. I want to let you know that at the end of every month I do a roundtable discussion where I kind of talk about the topics that we've covered on the Mind Deep DCS for the month. And I love it when guests come back, and they never come back. I don't know why. Maybe you guys didn't have fun. But you're always